And you're live.
Good morning.
Morning.
First session of the morning. You all ready for a deep technical discussion?
Yes.
Me neither. So we're going to keep it light. We're going to be talking about modern web application design. A little bit about me first. I've spoken at Virtual Fox Fest for the past few years. And Southwest Fox last year. I'm happy to get one more chance to speak in person. I'm the project manager for several. I'm the project manager for several projects on VFPX. I've got it. Do I have it turned on? Yeah, that's as loud as the mic gets. I'll do the best I can with my voice. A few skills listed here. A few other details. Let's talk a little bit about the title. By modern, I mean modernish. I think maybe a lot of devs are trying to figure out how to incorporate AI into their applications right now, at least if Microsoft has their way. But we're going to be talking about user interface using current web technologies, and specifically in regard to web applications, not websites. So I mean the same thing as a desktop application, except within the web. And I am historically a desktop developer. I have been doing web development the past several years, but I definitely came at this from a desktop point of view. And this is the part where I tell you that I am not a designer. I know design is right there in the title, so maybe I didn't choose the best title for this session, but we're going to start there. What does it mean to be a designer? Then we're going to talk about some preparation, some choices that you could make when it comes to creating a modern web app. And really the bulk of this session is we're going to dig into a sample app and look at some design choices. And hopefully for those desktop developers in the room like me, hopefully get some ideas of how you could translate desktop designs over to a single page application on the web. So if you're in the room, feel free to interrupt with any questions, and I'll also stop occasionally for the online folks. So let's start there. What does it mean to be a designer? UI, of course, refers to user interface, and UX refers to user experience. Well, what's the difference? Well, going all the way back to my first programming job, not sure if I should say the year, 1989. I worked with a couple of ladies that did. What's that? Is your microphone on? It's on. Yes. Let me put it a little bit closer. Going back to my first programming job, 1989, I worked with a couple of ladies that did data entry. And this was the user interface, literally. They knew some rudimentary dbase commands like append or edit, and they entered data using the built-in dbase 3 screens. And when adding new records, often the data on the new record was exactly the same as the previous record, except for one or two characters, which sometimes was just the next ID number. And they would retype all of that data on every record. Of course, that didn't sound right to me, so I cracked open our dbase book, and then I said, you need to set Carrie on. Well, one of those ladies, her name was Carrie. So she was like, do what now? What are you trying to pull, mister? I said, no, it's a dbase command. It'll make a copy of the last record when you append a new record, so you don't have to retype the whole thing. And I didn't hear anything. I looked at them, and both of their jaws were just dropped because of the many thousands of times they had done just that. Oops, I'm getting ahead of myself. What just happened? So they really loved me after that. Productivity went up. And after all that data was entered, they would have to run these very long reports on a speedy dot matrix printer. And that could take 3 to 4 hours. And we were a tight knit group. And so the boss would let them go shopping and run errands on the clock while those reports were running. It probably helped that one of the ladies was the boss's wife and the other was his niece, but that was a nice perk. But then I discovered this thing called a print spooler. And remember those terminate and stay resident programs you try to squeeze into 640K? This was the DOS days still. Well, the printer would still take 4 hours to complete, but of course, control of the computer came back within minutes, so they could keep working on something else while it was printing. They didn't love me so much after that anymore. I took away their shopping trips, but the process had been objectively improved, right? So in neither of those cases did we make a single change to the user interface, but both had a major impact on the user experience. So UI refers to the look and feel of an app. UX can extend outside the app, even outside the computer or other device, and consider the whole experience. And that's really what we care about, right? Good UI is a means to that end. UI and UX obviously go hand in hand. Depending on the organization, the two roles might be handled by the same person, or it could be different people. And when you look at these traits and these skills, this list is probably going to look very similar to people working in graphic design, advertising, and marketing design, basically other types of design. And so modern UI design is really about bringing those types of skills to applications and hopefully raising the bar, whether you're talking about aesthetics and usability. So back in the mid-2000s, I put together a fan site for a video game I was playing. It was just for fun, but I also kind of wanted to see what was the state, how things were advancing on the web. And you're looking at it now. I did not create this. I went out and bought a template for this site. And so it had this cool flash animation you see going at the top. And it included about a half dozen web pages with different layouts. And you would just fill in those pages. You pick one of the layouts, fill it in with your own content, text, images, links, whatever. And voila, you had this cool looking website. But the interesting part to me was that the template also included Photoshop files that had all the assets, but it was also clear that the original design and layout of the site was done in Photoshop, not within a web development tool. So, and then someone else, or maybe the same person, implemented that design in HTML, CSS, whatever the web technologies were of the day. And so that kind of opened my eyes that those without development skills could participate in the design and of the websites and now applications using a different set of tools. And so one of those are called user personas and journeys. These help UX designers create profiles to better understand their target customers. So one of these for a bookkeeper might look very different from that of a salesperson or a warehouse manager. So it's about understanding who your user is, who you're designing the application for. And this screen is, is from a tool called Extensio. There are also various tools for creating wireframe mockups. And this allows you to work through the flow and the layout of an app before you get into the aesthetics of it. And I think years ago, Rick Schumer did a session on Balsamic, and that tool is still available, it's still popular. And then you can move from wireframes to prototypes, which can be a pixel perfect representation of the application. There might even be some level of interactivity to the prototype, so you can experience some of the proposed functionality. And Figma is a popular web-based tool for prototypes and just general design. And something neat about it is multiple people, you might see these 3 mouse pointers. Multiple people can collaborate on the design at the same time. And so once the prototype and overall design are finalized, then they typically get the development team involved to implement it, although the collaboration will likely continue between the designers and the development teams. And besides these tools, Adobe has a strong presence, of course, in the design field. So there are definitely a lot of aspects to consider in this field. And in this session, we're going to be learning about none of these things. I'm not a designer. I don't have the skills to teach you to become a designer. But I hope you have a better understanding of what I mean when I say that. At the same time, let me ask you, how many of you have painted a room or a wall and chosen the paint color all by yourself without hiring a designer? Okay, how many of you have a spouse that has, that has, okay, or decided what to hang on the walls, how the room will be arranged, floors, countertops, cabinets. If you're doing a new house or a remodeling effort, you might even choose where the walls go. Often you do it yourself, right? So when I say I'm not a designer, I mean that I'm not a professional designer and I don't have this particular set of skills that you see on the screen. But as developers, we've often been called upon to handle the UI design of these applications. And in fact, the tools available for creating Windows desktop apps like Fox Pro actually encourage that, right? The design tools are built right into the development tool. So we do it ourselves. And in fact, why don't we just change the name of the session right now? Welcome to DIY web app design for developers. Can we get the website updated? No? Yeah, Doug's on it. So we're not professional designers, at least I'm not. But if you've ever built a user interface, you've taken on the design role or at least participated in it. So in that sense, we're all designers, aren't we? And that means you have some level of design skill. And hopefully, I'm going to prove that to you right now. What is wrong with this screen, with this form? Anyone? Right. It's the wrong controls, right? These options are mutually exclusive, or at least I don't even want to think about what happens if you take both pills. So it should be an option group, radio buttons, rather than checkboxes. That's just a tiny little thing, but it's about setting expectations for the user, right? So it's a bunch of little things like that that form our repertoire of design skills that we have as developers. Now, I don't want to discount the value of a professional designer. They have all those skills that we don't have, and they can have a level of expertise that's equal to that of a senior developer. So if you have a public-facing UI or you just otherwise want to bring it to the next level, by all means, hire a designer. For many of us, that's not an option. So we're going to be exploring design options available to developers that will hopefully provide a reasonably good interface for business applications. Let me stop here and see if there's any questions so far. Okay. So when you're investigating a modern web app, probably the first thing you want to know, what are the UI capabilities of the platform? Is the web even a valid platform for your modern application? And I'm not suggesting that we should all go out and rewrite all of our desktop apps for the web, but could you do so? Or could you create a new app for the web and have a satisfactory result compared to what you're used to having on the desktop? And for years, I believed that the answer was no. And the state of HTML, the state of what you could do in the browser was limited. compared to what you could do on the desktop in terms of interactivity, in terms of richness, and it just stagnated there for several years. And now many people created web applications anyway, but it always felt like there was a choice. I had to choose between the advantages of a desktop versus the advantages of a web. But it's 2024. How does the web UI measure up now? Can a web app rival the richness, the interactivity of a desktop app? And for the most part, I think the answer is now yes. There's still reasons to have desktop apps, but if you're looking at how HTML and the browser have advanced, the technologies have advanced over the years, the limitations of those things, the UI limitations, that's really no longer a reason to avoid it. That said, it is 2024, and that is probably the wrong question to ask. You probably need to be thinking beyond the desktop these days. Always exceptions, but you'd probably be thinking about creating apps that run across desktop, tablets, mobile devices, phones. And you can do this in a couple of ways. One way is to create a native app for each device. And another way is to create one responsive web app that adapts its UI to each device. And that's what we're going to look at using a single page application. So what exactly is that? Obviously, the defining feature of a single page application is that the entire app runs within a single page, but you can think of it in another way as well. So this is a diagram of a traditional web app where the web server generates HTML using templates and code that are on the server. Then that HTML is returned to the browser to render into something visual for us to see. In a single page web app, the server provides a web API to handle the request, but it doesn't generate any HTML. It only returns data, usually in the form of JSON. And as far as the server is concerned, the UI is just static HTML. And now there still are HTML templates, there's still code to affect the page, but those now live and execute within the browser. So that's what gives these types of apps like unprecedented access to manipulating the HTML and visually what you see in the browser, and without having to refresh the page on the server for every change. So in some ways, it's a return to like client server, although the lines between client and server are probably different, drawn in different places than a desktop app. In some ways, it's like that. So when you are preparing to design and develop a single page app, there are some choices you're going to want to make. Namely, choose a design system, also sometimes referred to as a design language. Choose a SPA, single page application framework, and choose a library of components or controls. And these are in no specific order. In fact, it's totally okay if a decision or choice you make in one category influences a decision in another. It's likely to work out that way. So when we're talking about a design system, let's go back to home improvement. You've decided you're going to paint that wall, you're going to do it yourself. You have a pretty good idea of what color you want, but you don't really know much more about paint. So you get to the paint store and you're confronted with this. I don't know anything about this. Not only do you have to pick a color, there are apparently 5 or 6 sheens to choose from. Fortunately, the paint store has the answer. They provide guidelines for choosing the right sheen for whatever project you're working on. And so experienced interior designers have already figured this out, right? And they are sharing that information with the rest of us. And a design system is it's a set of design principles and detailed specs it's targeted at other designers, but also includes guidelines that we developers can use. And of course, Microsoft has published UI guidelines for years that we've all used and taken advantage of. But when it comes to modern apps, there's actually a variety of design systems available. Material design was created by Google, first for their own apps and services, but then they shared that, and that's a popular choice among designers and developers. Fluent is Microsoft's design system. They use that in Windows 11, recent versions of Office, and modern apps like Teams. Ant Design is another one I've heard of, and there are really dozens of others. Some tech companies like Uber have their own design system, and even traditional companies like Walmart that they've shared. As far as SPA frameworks, Angular was really the first full-blown framework that enjoyed widespread adoption. And all of the frameworks that I'm going to show you make use of components. And you can think of a component as similar to a FoxPro container class or even an individual control class. And Kevin showed us custom HTML elements in his session, which is the same type of thing. And setting attributes on a component is very similar to setting objects on a property. So Angular is considered a full-featured framework, meaning it's going to contain most of the features you need to create a SPA application. And typically, you would create your entire app in Angular as far as the front end. Although you could combine it with a traditional web app, so you could have most of your app in a traditional server-rendered web pages, but then maybe certain pages would use Angular, like maybe a dashboard or an admin section that you want it to be more interactive than the rest of the app. But you're probably not going to use it within a traditional web page. Say if you wanted to add a grid control to an existing server rendered web page, Angular is probably not going to be your best choice for doing that. It offers two-way data binding. So this NG model is very similar to Control Source and FoxPro. And so that makes it very easy to both read and write from object properties. Technically, you can use JavaScript with Angular, but TypeScript is the default, and they recommend that because Angular is written in TypeScript. And typically, you're going to need a build system like Webpack. That's going to compile and package the HTML and JavaScript files that are then distributed to run in the browser. And it's generally considered a good choice for complex business applications. React is another one created by Facebook after Angular came out, but it has actually overtaken Angular in overall popularity, although Angular seems to hold its own when it comes to business applications. And React actually popularized that use of components, and the other frameworks kind of followed them on that. It does cover less surface area than Angular. So you could end up with an app with a smaller footprint and better performance, although you might need to go outside of React and add some other libraries to create a complete SPA app. And some developers prefer that. They want to pick and choose their pieces. That said, it's still probably not the choice for adding that interactive grid to an existing traditional web page. I don't know a lot about React or the way the data binding works. It seems to me that it defaults to a one-way data binding, although there are apparently ways to do it, to do two-way data binding. I'm not sure if it's as straightforward as like we did with Angular. And JavaScript is the default language in React in conjunction with JSX templates. Although some developers do prefer to use TypeScript with React, and that's totally feasible. There's no downside to that. Like Angular, you're going to need a build system with React. And it's considered for both a good choice for both large and small applications. And one interesting thing about React is that they also offer React Native, which means you can create native apps using the same code that you would for a web app. And Les Pinter did a session on React a few years ago, and that you can find that on YouTube on the Geek Gatherings channel. Vue was created by a former Google employee that was creating apps using the original version of AngularJS, and he just wanted to build something that was more lightweight and easier to get started with. So if you're doing a full spa app, you might need to bring in other pieces for this one, but this would probably be a good choice if you have existing web pages, you want to add some interactive features to it, like that grid. Vue would be a good choice for that. And you can kind of look at Vue as maybe a more modern approach in some places where you use jQuery before. And like Angular, it has two-way data binding. JavaScript is the default language, although again, you can use TypeScript if you like. The build system is optional. It goes along with that theme of kind of getting started, getting off the ground quickly without a lot of obstacles. And it's considered good for small and medium applications, or if you've got an existing app and you want to gradually adopt these more modern technologies into that app. And Rick Straw and Andrew McNeil have both presented sessions on Vue in the past. I think Scott might be talking a little bit about it later. Yes. And Blazor, this is Microsoft's foray into the spa world. And it's the youngest of these frameworks. And it's interesting about it is it compiles C# and Razor templates to WebAssembly. So JavaScript's no longer the only game in town when it comes to running code in the browser, which is very cool. In other ways, it kind of feels like a hack. I don't know. But this would obviously be very attractive to ASP.NET MVC web developers that already know C#, already know Razor. They can bring those skills over and create more interactive pages without having to learn a new language, a new framework. And of course, there are learning curves with that. Also includes the opportunity to share C# code across the client and the server, which can be handy. But the payload can be larger than other frameworks. It literally downloads .NET DLLs to execute in the browser. So that can be a little bit heavier than the others. JavaScript interop allows you to integrate with other JavaScript libraries, and there are a ton of them, which is good, but that's also a bridge the other frameworks don't have to cross. And with Microsoft, you always worry, how long is a new technology going to last before they cancel it? I'm not sure, but Blazor's been around for a few years now. It seems to have some traction in the Microsoft circles, or at least the .NET team seems to be behind it. And of course, you've also got what Kevin showed, custom HTML elements, and you can essentially roll your own framework. I want to give special mention to sorry, I skipped a section. Okay. Component libraries. There are, of course, the commercial offerings that have been around for companies been around for a long time, like Telerik, Kendo UI, DevExpress, Infragistics. So if you've got some complex controls like calendars, scheduling tools, charting, full-featured grids, you'll definitely want to check these out. And they usually have controls for any of the SPA frameworks. There are also several libraries, free libraries with basic controls. Angular Materia was created by Google to use with Angular and follows the material design principles. Microsoft has created components following Fluent Design that target React and Blazor, as well as several other native platforms. And Ant Design also seems to include a set of components for React. And here is where I want to give special mention to Bootstrap. It's not a design system, it's not a SPA framework, but it has been very popular with traditional server rendered web apps because it offers responsive web design features that makes it easy for your app to adapt across desktop, tablets, phones, the various sizes. But it does include a distinctive CSS styling. So in that sense, it does bring its own design along with it. So you'll see these component libraries will often offer Bootstrap themes. So if you have some existing Bootstrap apps, you can maintain a consistent look and feel. And these design systems, these component libraries, they include all the pieces you'll need. They don't necessarily tell you how to pull it all together. So there are also a large number of starter templates, sometimes called admin templates out there that can be purchased, or there are free options. And these can help you get off the ground with an attractive design. And a lot of these include their own set of library of components. If you do choose to go this route, just be aware that the template is going to greatly influence the design and the architecture of the components that you add. So spend some time with one. Don't look at it at just a surface level so you don't get stuck with something that's not going to scale well across your devices or meet your needs. You might be surprised if you get two of these side by side that both say they follow material design, how different one can look from another. So there's a lot of options within those guidelines. And don't allow a template to limit your design options. Be prepared to augment it with your own choices. Okay, how about now? Any questions? Nothing. Okay. Before we get into the sample app, I'll just share the choices I made for this. For the design system, chose Material Design. For the SPA framework, I chose Angular. And for the component library, I chose Angular Material. I didn't use any starter template. And this also wasn't designed to be a starter template for your apps either. It's just an example app to demonstrate some concepts. I do believe it represents a real-world business application. At Kevin's session, he used a counter example to demonstrate at a low level how to create those custom elements. I thought that was perfect for that level of detail. But when I see other samples online for weather forecasts and to-do lists, that just doesn't connect the dots for me in terms of a full application. So this sample has multiple tables, forms, reports, the usual stuff you would have in a desktop application, and most of the pieces are fully functional. I did follow the material design guidelines, but most of what I'm going to talk about are the things that are not addressed by the guidelines. How you pull this stuff together. It's like, I know how to do this on a desktop app for years. How do I do it in this context? So definitely consider what I show you as like my personal choices, just some ideas, more than recommendations, definitely not rules. You're not going to see a revolution in a UI. It looks very basic, very functional, but hopefully that does help you to see how you could translate some desktop ideas to the web. But also design goes deeper than aesthetics, right? So maybe you'll walk away with some ideas, but maybe you'll also see some things, hey, I would improve upon that. I would do some things better. So embrace that feeling, embrace that inner designer. And here's the architecture of the sample app. I've got FoxPro data in Northwind DBC. I used ASP.NET Web API for the web server, and that uses the entity framework provider that Tom Brothers created to access that data. And I've also used .NET to Fox to run reports. Now, this backend portion could be replaced with Westwind Web Connection or maybe one of the other web frameworks. So you can be totally Fox Pro on the back end. Our focus is going to be on the front end, which is running Angular. Okay, let's dig in. That was not, sorry. Okay, let's start by talking about the shell of the app. And by that, I mean the top bar and the sidebar that we use for navigation. And this sidebar is going to adapt to different device sizes. So you're going to see me click this button here. That's why I have the debugger open to easily switch device sizes. So you can see here on a mobile phone, the sidebar is hidden. And as you would expect, clicking on the menu or the hamburger button brings the sidebar up, and then you can make your choice, and then it goes away. And the rest of the page has adapted to fit on the smaller device. So you have some scrolling, but you're not having to pan and zoom around the page to see the content. And on a tablet, and I apologize, I have limited control of these, the size of this, but you can see that the page has adapted in a different way that fits that device better. And for the sidebar, I'm more constrained with the horizontal space in this mode. So I've chosen to just show the icons. I still keep them fully available. And then I can click the button to show the labels and make a choice if you need to do that. And then back to desktop. You also have that option if you want to reveal more horizontal space. You can make the labels invisible. As far as what's on the sidebar, I've included a home page, totally optional. But you could put something like a dashboard here, or news about the app, or news about the business. Just an introductory page if you want to have that. The rest of the options here are similar to what you would find at the top level of a desktop menu. So I'm going to open a menu here in FoxPro. And the menus that you have in pretty much every desktop app, File, Edit, View, Window, that's really a convention of the operating system, right? Dating back to the first versions of Windows, actually the Mac before that. And typically you're not going to carry that convention over to a modern app. You might have some things that you've added on this app in these menus that you would need to put elsewhere, but the top level menus themselves are typically not going to be included. But the rest of the menus that you add to your app, like data entry, reports, maintenance, admin, these are, you can put these in the sidebar. And so for data entry, this contains two items that I consider to be like the two key tables of this app where the data entry is performed. And I've chosen to just put those directly on the sidebar. And so if your app had maybe just a single key table, well, you might just go straight to that page instead of to a home page. Right? So when you start Facebook or Twitter, you want to go right to the feed, right? So consider that as an option in that case. What about this maintenance menu that has multiple levels? Well, a tree view, it's still a valuable control in a modern app. And you could use that in the sidebar uh, to drill down at those levels. You're going to see this icon here, options, and that's not really part of the app. That's just a way for me to show you different options for design. So I'm going to enable that tree view. And now you can see I could just drill down into the menu options and make a choice from there. And this works great on desktop. On a phone, not as great. It feels a little unwieldy to me because it could easily make your sidebar have to be scrollable. It's easy to tap off of it and accidentally close it, and so now I have to go back. It works, but I lost. Try this. There we go. What I prefer instead is really just a full page containing the rest of the menu options. This is a panel bar that can expand and collapse, and it just feels better in a mobile environment. You don't have to worry about it going away on you, and it scales well across desktop and tablets as well. So consider that as an option, and it keeps your sidebar clean with just one level. For each table, I like to take a list and search first approach, which is something we've actually at MBS have done in our desktop app as well for many years. So you can see here I've got a default first page of records in an order that makes sense. So for customers, I've just done alphabetical order, and over on the orders page, I might list the most recent order first, because maybe that's the most likely thing you're likely to go back to. And rather than multiple search boxes for each field, I just have one search box that will search all of these columns. So I can search for ID, or I can search within the company name, or within the contact name, and it'll search across all of those. Now, if you had something like a date range, you would, of course, need to address those separately. And for this single search approach, it often works well to use like a contained search rather than an exact match or starts with to pull up your results. And it automatically searches. You can press enter, or you can press the search button to perform the search, but also automatically performs the search for you without having to do that, which is sort of what's I think expected in a mobile environment. That said, this is hitting the back end for each search, so you want to avoid hitting it with every character that's typed. So I've added a debounce period of about half a second. So if I type quickly here, that was one search for those three characters. I did not perform three searches against the back end. As far as the grid or the table here, this I think is typical of what you would see in a traditional web app that was designed primarily for desktop, and it works well there. It has multiple columns, so you can sort each column, and this is sorting on the back end and then just returning the first set of records to the front end for that. On the phone, I've changed that to display all of the data in one column. And each row can contain multiple lines of data. So why did I do that? So scrolling is generally considered good within a web or mobile app. Scrolling within scrolling, not so good. So You notice there's only one scrollable section here within this page. You can't scroll up here. And on other forms, we'll see there might be more fields up here that you do want to scroll off of the screen. In that scenario, I would not want to also have a scrollable grid within that scrollable form. Does that make sense? Want to have one scrollable section. And that's kind of the opposite of what we've done on desktop, right? On desktop, you kind of avoid scrolling the entire form, but you have individual scrollable controls like grids or list boxes within the form. So it's a different approach. In this case, I put everything in one column to avoid horizontal scrolling. I have seen some apps where they have vertical scrolling along with what I would call maybe horizontal swiping, like Netflix or Spotify. You'll scroll down and they'll have a genre in a row, and then within that row they'll have images of each title, and you can kind of grab and swipe those left or right to reveal more titles. In that case, you've got a large touch surface area with the images. You also, each title, you can fully see that. In this case, if I left the horizontal scrolling, you would have to scroll to see the company name and the contact name for each row. So I want the data for each record to be fully visible to the user without having to scroll. We have a details button here that will take me to a details page that we're going to look at in a little bit. And having this button on each row is fine, but it sure does take up a lot of space when you're on a phone. So what I prefer to do is just make the whole row selectable. And so that takes up less horizontal space while simultaneously providing a larger click or tap surface. And on desktop, it's very obvious that a row can be clicked when you're hovering over it with the mouse. On the phone, there actually are some phones out there, my understanding, that have a hover capability. I don't know how it works. And I doubt if most of those owners know that. That can be done. It's certainly not a universal capability. So we need some kind of indicator that the row can be tapped, right? And so I can just add a little chevron here that makes it clear that there's more information if you tap on it. It doesn't take up too much space. Here at the bottom of the grid, I've got this paging interface, which again is typical and a very nice feature on desktop. So you can go to each page, and as you go to each page, it pulls in a new set of records from the back end. On mobile, not so great. First of all, it's not on the screen right now. I have to scroll down, and never mind that the new button is in the way. So I'm gonna go to the next page. I have to scroll back up, scroll back down. It's sort of like that scrolling within scrolling guideline. Scrolling plus paging is not a great experience. So what I prefer is a load more approach. So I've got my initial set of records here that I've loaded from the back end. When I get to the bottom of that, I can press this load more button. It keeps those existing records in there, but I can easily scroll to the additional set of records as well. But even better than that, why don't we just get rid of that load more button? If you watch this scroll bar here, if you can see that on the side, as we get near the bottom, it has automatically loaded some more records. So it's a more seamless approach. On tablet, you're going to want to load more than 10 records. If you're taking this approach, you want to fill up the screen. And portrait tablet is typically going to be more records than a phone or even a desktop app. Okay. So on my maintenance tables, if I clicked on a row, that would take me directly to the data entry screen for that record. But for my key tables here, I've chosen to have a details page. Again, totally optional. But the details page is a read-only view that allows me to display selected info from the customers table. And I can also pull in info from related tables. So like I've got the orders for that customer that customer's made here. And I could also add some additional tasks here, like this add order button would start a new order and automatically fill in that customer's customer ID for me. So we're going to see that dialogues are still a part of modern web apps, but the multiple document interface, MDI, that's where you have multiple windows open within your app. That typically is not part of a modern app. It's not going to work on mobile, right? But you use MDI for a couple of use cases. And one of those is just to easily switch between different screens within your app. And so you can achieve that in a browser with multiple browser tabs. So you can easily switch, quickly switch between the screens just like you would in an MDI scenario. So that's one scenario why you do that. The other reason you might use MDI is that you like to have two windows open side by side so you can view both information from both of those at the same time. On desktop, you can still do something like that by kind of snapping this to the side and having another separate browser window open so you can view both of those at the same time. Of course, that's not going to work very well on a phone. So that's another reason my details page might be nice. You can pull together multiple bits of information from multiple sources, multiple tables, put them together on one screen. That's going to work well across all device sizes. So notice here I'm on the details screen, and our menu icon has changed. It's no longer there, and now we have a back button. And when I click on that back button, it takes me to the list of customers as expected. And this is the equivalent of pressing the back button in the browser with one exception. So let's say I open up I'm going to copy this URL. Let's say I open up a new tab. And this is the new tab experience in Chrome. I'm just going to paste that URL directly in. And so here, if I press the back button in the browser, it's going to take me back to that new tab page outside of my app, or it might have been a different website entirely. Not really what I want to happen with the back button inside my app. So for this special case, clicking it within the app will take me back to my customer page and keep me within my app, which is what I want. So I'm here on my details page, and I've got my orders here. I can click on one of those orders to take me to that order. And then I can go back to the customer by clicking on the customer link. And then I can look at a different order. All those clicks are now in the browser history. So let's say at this point I want to go back to the customer's page or one of these other pages. Well, on desktop and tablet, this is always visible. So no problem there. But on phone, Let's back up. I don't have my menu button. So if I want to get back to that customer's page, I have to click 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, finally, I'm back to my customer's page, or even at a point where I can select the menu to go to another page. Not great. So if you have an app where you can kind of get yourself in this scenario, I say give your user some kind of escape hatch. So you don't typically see the menu button left on the screen here right next to the back button, maybe because it would be too easy to press the wrong button. But in this auxiliary menu here, you could add a menu button there, and then that reveals the sidebar. Or another approach is if you don't want to show the whole sidebar, you can use a more option that brings up a bottom sheet with maybe some more limited options there. Just a way for your user to get out of that scenario. So I'm going to do a search here. I'm going to go to the details page. And now I'm going to press back. What happened to my search?
What search?
And what happened to all those improvements I made to my grid? They're all gone. So watch the URL up here if you can see that. When I go to the details page, the URL has changed, and that's considered a different route now. It has loaded a different component, the details component, and it has released the customer list component. It's no longer in memory, and its state is gone with it. So to handle that, you have to manually save the state. That's a little bit different than we're used to on desktop, right? Things just kind of stay open all the time. And it kind of sucks. But like I said, what we need to do is explicitly save the state, and I have written some code to do that. So first of all, I'm going to turn on all these options that I prefer. And this time I'm going to activate my code to save the state. And now I'm going to go back. Everything is there now. So keep that in mind when you're working with these spa applications. You have to deal with that, and obviously you want something the user's going to like. They won't like that if they lose it every time. Okay.
Is it appropriate to ask what mechanism you're using for saving state?
For this demo, I'm just using session storage. The question is, what mechanism did I use to save the state? I'm using the browser session storage. But the real answer to that question is, how long do you want that to stick around? So you can use, in Angular, you could use a service, which is sort of like a global object, to keep it in state, and that will live until you press the refresh button. Session storage will stay there until you close the browser, that browser tab. You can do local storage on the browser, and which will stay there until you delete it. And some people like to do save state on the server. So if you can start a task on your desktop, pick it up on your phone, and it will remember where you left off. So you have a lot of options with that. Any other questions? Okay. So let's talk about data entry. You probably noticed this big button here in the bottom right-hand corner. That is a floating action button, and it is used to perform the primary action on a page. So on this page, I could add a new customer. On the details page, I can edit that customer that I'm currently viewing. And you typically only have one floating action button on a page, and other tasks can be elsewhere on the page, like I've done with this add order button. Material design does allow for a small number of additional floating buttons if you need them. And those would typically be like smaller of icons here than the main button. I've also seen cases where clicking this button will pop up a menu, and then you can make one of those selections. When it comes to data entry screens, forms, you have a couple options. You can do a pop-up dialog within the current page, and that looks good. It works well on phones as well. Just if you're using the phone, just make sure that your buttons stay visible the entire time. You don't want the user to have to scroll to get to save and cancel typically. You make that option. Another option, oops, that's not what I meant, is a full screen data entry page. So we've got the save and close buttons here up in the toolbar. And this is nice because you can see more controls on the phone at the same time. Both options are equally valid. And in mobile apps, I tend to see this full screen option more often. And pop-up dialogues are more common with things that'll fit on the screen without scrolling, like message boxes. Or you might have a full screen data entry page, and then you need to pop up a window to enter some additional fields from it. So that's another scenario for dialogues. So here I have some fields that are required that is noted by the asterisk. Now this one is more of a rule than an idea. Validations, security, calculations, other business logic, those should definitely be performed on the back end. So if a scenario is not clear, ask yourself, what would happen if a developer used my API directly, completely bypassing the UI? Would the protections for the validations and security, would those still be in place? And that sort of answers the question for you. You need to have that stuff on the server. What you can do is repeat some of those things on the front end for a better user experience. So if I remove this company name, tab out, it immediately tells me the field is required, right? It didn't have to go to the server to figure that out. If I press save anyway, the back end has my, well, it'll let you know that the validation failed, right? So you're not going to get past that. Even better approach that I did on this dialog is if the form is not valid, just disable the save button. Just make sure your user knows why it's disabled. Let's talk about some of the controls. Text boxes have a floating label in this design. So an empty field contains a full-size label, but when you click into it, it floats up to a smaller font that is still legible, hopefully. And that's kind of cool looking. And the label stays in position once you have data in there. And having the label above rather than to the left, like most of my desktop applications would have the label to the left of the field. Having it above is better for mobile devices where your horizontal space is more constrained. But also having a smaller label, it takes up less vertical space as well. Now you've seen this toggle control that I've used to activate the options. You might be wondering, is that the modern checkbox? But it's actually a different use case. Toggles are for on and off buttons that have an immediate effect on the UI or the behavior of the app without having to press save first. So as soon as I press that, the screen changed, right? But in this other scenario, where I've got a discontinued option, that's not going to take effect until I press save. So in that case, you'll want to stick with a traditional checkbox. on this orders page, I have this customer drop control, which of course this could have thousands of records in it. So what I've made is a searchable autocomplete. So I can search with it, and it will give me a list of records that meet that search, but it's still concise control, like a drop down. And for employee, I have a typical drop down control. Let's look at this on a phone. So I've got, I've got this page here that scrolls, right? And then when I've got the drop down here, it scrolls as well. So it might seem like we're kind of breaking our guideline about scrolling within scrolling. But notice this, while the drop down is open, I cannot scroll the rest of the page. And if I tap on this X, tapping off of the drop down closes it, but it didn't actually press that button. So essentially, when this is open, the form is in a modal state, right? You can't do anything except either close the drop down or make a selection from it. And that's what makes it work. Right? It would be really unwieldy if you could scroll the form while that drop down is open. We also have date controls with a drop down calendar. That's always nice. It works how you would expect. Tabs. Tabs are still great on desktop, and they work great on tablets. On phones, not so great. They're acceptable, but just okay. So I'll show you what I mean. So I've got my tabs here, and if I scroll down, and this has a bunch of items on this order. Let's say at this point I want to go to the shipping tab. Well, I'm going to scroll back up, go to the shipping tab, scroll back down. Yeah, that's one of the problems you face on mobile. But one way you can handle that is to make those tabs sticky. So they still scroll, but once it gets to the top, they remain at the top and remain in view. So now I can scroll down as much as I want and then switch to that shipping tab whenever I want to. What if I add more tabs than can fit on a row? Well, you get these arrows that allow you to scroll the tabs. This just doesn't feel great. And maybe we just need a better tab control to handle that. And I really don't have a simple solution for this one. You could get rid of the tabs altogether and just let the whole form scroll. Or you could use a panel bar where you could have collapsible sections for the products and the shipping. Not a great solution in either case, but it is feasible to have a completely different interface for desktop and mobile within the same HTML. That just adds a little effort. That's more code to maintain. So at some point, you're probably going to ask yourself, is it worth supporting both? And then the bigger question is, okay, is my app a mobile-first app or is it a desktop-first app? And if you have a large application with multiple areas, my advice is don't lock your entire app into one of those choices. Right? Examine each scenario separately. So if orders are typically entered at a desk on a desktop computer, optimize for that scenario. Right? I still want this feature to be available across all devices, but maybe I'll just leave these tabs that are not great on mobile because it's going to be very rare that anyone enters data on a phone. On the other hand, if you've got an app that's used in a warehouse with tablets, optimize for that scenario. Make sure you got a top-notch experience on tablets for those users. So we all have resource constraints. It doesn't necessarily have to be perfect across all devices. 5 minutes. Okay. Data entry within the grid. You can have read-only rows that pop up a dialog. That works well. I wanted to show you inline editing. And oops, it's acting up. Okay. I'm still avoiding horizontal scrolling, and I'm doing that by having multiple lines of fields within each row. And that's really easy to do in an HTML, easier than maybe a desktop scenario. It's also easy to have different types of controls like this drop down. Within it, I've got the spinner here. I'm even performing some of these calculations on the front end because they're simple calculations. I'm still performing them on the back end, but I can make that more snappy. For deleting rows, I like marking a row rather than deleting it immediately. I also don't have to confirm it with the user because they can just easily undo that choice. You can see I made them a different color to make it obvious they've been deleted. You can do something similar with new rows, making it a different color. Just make sure it's different than the delete color. And when you undo this, since it's a new row, it just immediately removes it. Reports. So if you're using a third-party reporting software that was designed for a web, it's probably going to have its own viewer. For FoxPro reports, exporting them to a PDF and viewing in the browser works well. And you could, all browsers nowadays can just open a PDF. You could do that, but I prefer a more integrated experience. Mozilla has made their PDF viewer that they use in Firefox available as a separate project named PDF.js. And someone else has already wrapped that in Angular, so it was really easy for me to just include this in my app. I've got a full viewer experience here that's going to scale well across all the devices. And then from there, the user can print or download the document if they want to. Performance is generally pretty good. Of course, it's going to be different than a desktop app because you might have internet latency between the client and the front end, so it can depend on your connection speed. But the UI itself, I think, feels pretty snappy, even on phones. Not quite as fast as a native, but comparable. And those are really the basics. So I hope I gave you some ideas of how a typical business app scenarios could be handled in a modern web app. And that was my goal, to show very basic stuff. But I would say don't stop there, right? Get creative. You can do things in the web to be more creative, that might be easier than doing on desktop. So this type of listing that we've seen, it works. It's very functional. It can be kind of boring. I went from Battleship Gray desktop app to black and white modern web app. You can use a different type of layout, like cards. And man, Northwind has hired some great people. I don't know about their sales, but their dev team, man, they rock. And yes, I use the absolute oldest pictures that I could find online. And search still works with this type of layout. So they're former members of our Fox team that kept FoxPro going at Microsoft as long as they could. And of course, if I can, we of course have our organizers here that have kept the conference going here for so long. Let's look at this handsome guy. Oh, look here. Doug reports to Doug and no one else. Some other ideas when you're entering a new order, it doesn't have to be a typical data entry screen. Maybe it could be more like a shopping cart experience. Users know how to shop, right? You can get some other ideas from media apps like Netflix and Spotify, or even video game platforms like Steam and Xbox, all within the context of a business app, right? But those are the folks that are kind of pushing user interface forward. So again, get solid on the basics, the layout, but then get creative. Have some fun creating better experiences for your users. And let's see if I can get back to my slides. That's all I have. This is what we talked about today. Hopefully you came away with some ideas of how you would do this. And so that's it. Please fill out your evaluation, and thank you very much.